You can't wear white after Labor Day? This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Mel,
And I'm Lisa.
and this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. Join us as we continue our new series where we get up close and personal with the psycho Biddy herself. We're talking Hagsploitation.
Welcome to episode 4 of our Hagsploitation series. Today we are talking about the 1994 dark comedy Serial Mom from director and writer John Waters. So, a little bit about this. Kathleen Turner is our hag in this Hagsploitation. She plays Beverly Sutphin, mom to 2 teens and wife to a dentist living in Baltimore, Maryland. And she is the titular serial mom, a mom who finds that when people break the rules of polite society, they need to be punished, and she's the one who's going to do it. Sam Watterson plays her husband, Eugene, and we have Ricky Lake and Matthew Lillard as her children, Misty and Chip. So, a little bit about this film before I turn it over to Mel. Now, first of all, you probably noticed in the intro that Matt is not with us. Sometimes, schedules just don't allow us to get all three of us together, but we definitely miss him, especially talking about Serial Mom. When I heard that we were going to be doing this Hagsploitation series, or when we were planning it, I guess, I knew I wanted to talk about Serial Mom because, of course, we've been talking a lot about the films of the 1960s, which really was this kind of psycho bitty um, era. It was an explosion. It's really where this subgenre took root. But Serial Mom is a really fun, I think, take on it. So I definitely wanted to talk about this one a little bit. A few little fun facts about the film that I do want to point out. When John Waters was doing this, of course, he pulled in several of the actors who have worked with him on other things. So Ricky Lake is in this. But Tracy Lords and Patty Hearst also have uh, have cameos in the film, which is really fun. John Waters himself does the voice for Ted Bundy. So there's a scene where Beverly's husband is discovering what his wife has been up to, and he's going through their bedroom and he finds like her reading material, and he finds she's been writing some of these serial killers in prison, and he finds a audio tape, like a cassette tape from um Ted Bundy to her, and he's talking, and John Waters does that. So it's a really fun thing. But there's also a lot in here just about the horror movie genre in general. And Waters pays homage in fun ways to people like William Castle. This very much feels like, oh, this could have been a William Castle film, but also Herschel Gordon Lewis, who I also love. And pertinent to this No Fear series, Straitjacket is referenced in this film. I think, especially when we rewatched Straitjacket, it was clear to me that Kathleen Turner kind of is playing into that role quite a bit. She does a lot with the really quick shifts um in her face and in her emotions in this. That's really fun to watch. Like, she can go from really sweet mom and, I've got a smile on my face, and as they describe her in the movie, she's very much Leave Beaver's mom, and then she can go murderous really quick. And it's fun to kind of see that shift, but we get a kind of throwback to that where Straight Jacket is playing on the TV at one point. In particular, it's the scene the opening scene where she kills her husband and his lover in bed with the axe. So while we don't see, I don't think, Kathleen Turner running around with an axe, we do see her with lots of other fun weapons. So we're going to talk all about it. I will also say that Matthew Lillard is a lot of fun in this. This was, I think, only the second movie he had done. So this was a couple of years before Scream. He really hadn't done too much. And I think he delivers a really fun performance. But I deeply love this movie. I I kind of forced Mel into watching this. So, Mel, I'm curious to hear your thoughts since this is your first time watching it. What did you think about Serial Mom?
Well, yes, this is my first time watching Serial Mom. And as I was saying before we hit record, I'm glad that you added it to this series, not just for the reasons that you mentioned, which, broadens our, the years that we're looking at Hagsploitation, and the fact that literally we have like a meta moment where Straitjacket is in the movie after having just talked about it, but also just because as we were talking before we hit record, there's just the humor in this movie, and just the what's the word I'm looking for, wackiness of it. I enjoyed. We were chatting before we hit record, basically just of moments of dialogue or bits of the movie that we found particularly entertaining. I'm sure some of them will probably come up in our discussion, but for the episode, I'm sure we want to, take a deep breath and put our analysis hats on and get real serious about this, like one can, this movie. So I guess if I talk about like my first impressions, obviously the kind of just as I was saying before, the irreverent, like just turn with every single aspect of this movie. Um, every single thing was kind of set up for satire in a way, but I already mentioned that aspect. I think the other thing as a first impression that I thought was interesting was just the ways that in the movie we have these kind of uh, meta or self-aware, I guess we would say, moments in it. So we're talking about this in a Hagsploitation series, and I know that we will talk about that. But one thing that this movie does that I think connects, so bear with me here, is if you look up stuff about this movie online, people talk a lot about its kind of almost like mockumentary aspect as a true crime story. So the beginning has the tile that says like this film is a true story, is based on all these interviews and court testimony, and the names have been changed to protect the innocent, no financial, everything that you think, like if you're watching like City Confidential or all those true crime television shows that people were so into and are still on TV. um but you have this kind of setting it up, and throughout it does similar things like telling you what day it is and what time it is, and of course you get the trial, and it turns into this like media circus basically. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that as we go, but my first impression was that this is my first time watching the movie, and I didn't look at too much before I went into it because I wanted to go into it as it was. And so that idea of like the fake, this is a true story kind of mockumentary film, I thought was really interesting, because this is looking not just at horror and not just like her as a woman serial killer, but also looking at how this is something that is interesting to people, and how, I mean, this is like a podcast bonanza. And no matter what media we have, whether it's newspapers or TV shows or podcasts, people are interested in these sorts of things for various reasons. And we have that set up, I think, very well in the movie. And even her interest in the serial killers that she hides from her family and other books and etc. Um, and that got me thinking about how it's also a little bit of a gesture to Straitjacket in particular, but Hagsploitation films, because there's this idea of like, look at this monstrous older woman doing these monstrous things. We need media coverage. We know in Baby Jane, while it doesn't belabor it, there is stuff in newspapers and people talk about things that they heard. There's news broadcasts. Straight Jacket has a little tour, if I remember right, it has almost like the twirly newspaper type thing, but it's just a kid like yelling the headlines of the killer for love or something like that, or love slayer, whatever they call her. So I thought it was. I think this movie is interesting because it's kind of melding aspects of Hagsploitation, which we've been talking about, with the 50s nostalgia, surface level kind of idea of what we think is happy, and correct, in quotes. And then that kind of true crime, like actually being interested in this kind of underside. And when all those things kind of bump up against each other, that's kind of how I started looking at this movie as I was watching it. Um, but yeah, just with like some of the kind of wackiest ways of letting those things bump up against each other, which I enjoyed. So Lisa, I know these aren't your first impressions, but do you have impressions that kind of connect to our topics?
I have impressions that I still really love this movie. No, one thing that really um, was kind of fun for me, I guess, is um, just remembering that this film is as funny as I remember it being. Um, it, I think you're right. I had forgotten that it had the kind of mockumentary aspect to it. Like, I didn't remember that. That was one of the things that I think really connected it to William Castle because it did feel a little gimmicky, of, "Oh, this is real." I mean, but not really because he's also kind of winking at us. But, so I enjoyed that, aspect of it. I think what was really interesting is how it took this idea of a quote unquote seemingly normal woman going crazy, which is essentially what like hagsploitation or like psycho biddies is kind of about. Because listeners, this is something Mel and I were talking about before, but when we talk about hagsploitation, it really is, if you're gonna get really nitpicky about the subgenre, it really is about women in their, like, late 40s, early 50s, maybe pushing to 60, but it's a very, like, specific, I think, age range of woman, that rather than going into, like, elderly horror, like, I know we have talked about, like, X and Pearl as being something that is moving into hagsploitation, and I think it does. I think it plays with some very specific aspects of the subgenre, but I think when you're looking, and you're getting really into the nitty-gritty of hagsploitation, you're really talking about that kind of middle-aged woman because it's this idea of a woman who has kind of outlived her usefulness. And I'm not saying that like from my point of view. It's kind of from like a patriarchal point of view. But this, I think that's why um in the first movie we watched, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, where we get this child star who is like aged out of the system, right? It's this kind of like she's outlived society's expectations of her. And I think in this particular one, we're getting a woman who is, a wife and a mother, but her kids are teenagers. They're about to leave the house and she's in suburbia and she's surrounded by other women who are very similar to her, but they don't really seem to have a lot going on. They all just kind of sit in their house and watch Annie on TV on VHS and drink beer in the middle of the day and gossip. And so I don't know. I think it's really kind of an interesting. situation that Beverly Sutphen is finding herself in, but she's going out and she's finding new hobbies, right? But there was a great line where she's laying in bed next to her husband, and the family kind of knows, like, oh, something's going on with mom's not normal anymore. And her husband says, like, I've read all about this. Is this menopausal? And not only did I like laugh out loud at that point, I think when I had watched this originally, because when this came out in 1994, I would have been just starting high school. So, menopause was very far from my brain. I am pretty sure that line went right over my head. I mean, I knew what it was, but like it didn't register with me the way a lot of the other like funny, quippy lines in this movie did. But looking at it through the lens of like Hagsploitation and how we're doing it, it really, really just tickled me that that was in there, because I really think it's about, a woman trying to figure out where she fits now. And it is a big kind of roast and send up of suburban life too. Um, where her family doesn't understand her anymore. And her husband is trying, like, he's very sweet, but he's also very useless in this film. um, he's constantly disappointing her, even if it's by accident. She just wants to go look at birds, and he can't even do that. He has to go help his patients, and he tries to understand what she's going through. He's read about it in books, but he doesn't quite understand what she's going through either. um so I thought that was really fun. I thought this is a movie that it doesn't need to be that smart or pay that much attention to like the genre, but again, that's why I love John Waters, because he can do both. He can have fun, he can have a few bloody murders. He can have quippy lines, but he can also know the subgenre that he's working in. So I really enjoyed that. And I think probably teenage me did not quite pay attention in the way I did when I rewatched it. So yeah, I'm really glad we're talking about it.
Yeah, I agree. And I was thinking while you were talking, just to kind of build off what you were talking about there, is there are these kind of, and I'm saying this about this movie, but there are these layers here, or these slight kind of nuances in the humor and different things that happen in the movie that I agree with you are playing with different aspects of her as a woman in this, I guess we'll say, time of life, in this family situation, because we see that she has already, like, the police detectives mentioned this, as you mentioned earlier. It's like going into her house and interacting with her is like being in the 1950s. And this is a movie that came out in the 90s. And it seems like to me, it is, basically trying to be in like a contemporary time period, maybe the 80s. Um, so she's keeping up an image of something that is already nostalgic in the time that she's living in, and that is like attractive to other people, because she's fulfilling that role, but it also becomes part of her killing spree to a certain extent. That opening scene where she has the perfect kitchen except for the fly, and she's obsessed with killing this fly. Like, she's not a person who wouldn't hurt a fly for sure. While her family is talking about, how this strangler guy is in prison and got his college degree, and they're basically talking about how we need capital punishment and not realizing what the mom is going to be doing, obviously. But yeah, I mean, it's like you're in a 1950s kind of sitcom in color. The way she's dressed, just providing them breakfast, she keeps giving them food. Like, this breakfast is going on forever. The dad's getting ready for work. The one kid, I think, is probably what Chip is probably like a junior or senior in high school. Misty's already in college because she talks about how Carl, I think, is like a year ahead of her in college or something. She's going to a local school. So yeah, like you said, she's on the verge of not doing these sorts of breakfasts with the kids anymore, and they are on the verge of moving on. And her killings become not just ways to keep up with her rules, like don't chew gum, don't wear white after Labor Day. They also become ways to protect the family. It's almost like her shifting into her 40s and this time of, like you said, as other people, we're not saying this, like she's moved from being a mom to now what is she doing? She has the birding interest and these sorts of things, right? But she goes after Chip's teacher because he says that even though Chip is doing well in school, he watches too many horror movies and that's bad for his character. She goes after the boy that Misty thought was her boyfriend, kind of led her on, or maybe she misunderstood. We don't know. Um, and the vast majority of the woman who doesn't rewind her tape, like, and we can talk about these in more individual detail, but it's like the murders that she does are people who bothered her family in some way. It's almost like she's protected them as their mom up until this point, and now she's going to the absolute extreme to continue protecting them. And so, like you said earlier, Kathleen Turner is moving through numerous emotions, like from I'm Donna Reed, if people still get that reference now, um, to I'm a crazed murderer, like stabbing people. Like her facial expressions change that fast based on I'm trying to put up the happy facade versus the facade is threatened. Now I've got to go after people. And I thought the humor worked really well with those two bumping up against each other. I mean, like one of the scenes that had me laughing and I had to watch it a second time was when she steals the person's van to go kill Chip's friend because she thinks he's a threat because he saw her murder someone. She's chasing him to set him on fire, basically. And she flies by her family who are looking for her. And she's like angry, like driving the van to try to get Scotty. And then she, as she goes through the intersection and sees them, is like smiling and waving and blowing them kisses. I mean, she's moving back and forth. She's script changing from this is what I ought to be and this is what I should appear to be. And then there's a threat to me and the family that I have to take care of. And I think that too kind of plays off this idea of like, how are women supposed to present themselves? What are women's roles in society? And then what happens when those roles are shifting? And of course, this is an extreme satirical way of looking at it, but um, she is motivated to kill for some of the same reasons she was motivated, like to be a mother. Besides the fact that she's just got disturbing issues, right? This is feeding too. Um, but yeah, I thought that kind of walking that line, it's so many of the things that we've been talking about, how women present themselves and what women feel like they need to do, etc. And we talked about in both our previous Hagsploitation movies, and it's still kind of happening here um, in this particular movie.
Yeah, that's a funny scene. Well, there were so many good scenes in this. I really am struggling to find one in particular to talk about. But yeah, I think you're right. I think this is, kind of playing on this Donna Reed perfect wife, which, if we do have younger listeners and you don't know who Donna Reed is, I understand. But maybe we can say, I think if this film were made today, instead of a woman trying to emulate, the perfect like 1956 sitcom mom, it may be trying to emulate the trad wife online influencer of, just being the one who's always there for your family and who can protect them and provide and give everything and who makes her house at home, which, as you pointed out, even in the 90s there was already that kind of push against that, which is a really interesting, I think, dichotomy that we see in this film. I also want to mention too, just this idea of this movie being a send up of suburban life, in a way that I think is really satisfying to watch. Of course, this is made in 94, so it's hard not to talk about like the satanic panic. And there's definitely a little bit of this in the film because we see that, especially with Matthew Lillard's character, her son Chip, and his girlfriend is a horror movie fanatic. Like, she loves absolute gore, and has kind of, it seems, brought him over to that side where he has always been a film lover but loves horror films. His bedroom, I will say, is absolute. I want to decorate my office. Like, that is, he's got great, classic horror movie posters all over. He's got a little fun, I've actually got a really similar one that I'm sitting on right now, but a really fun, um, movie poster pillow, like, on his bed. And, he works in a, uh, video rental space, so that's also kind of, like, adding to that. She does too, but, um he is he's judged because of the films that he watches. Like, there must be something wrong with him because he watches so much blood and gore. And in fact, when it's brought up to him that he is watching such disgusting things. He even has that great line where he says, "Blood Feast is the Citizen Kane of gore movies." Like, clearly, you can't fault him for watching Herschel Gordon Lewis because he's just watching good cinema, which his mother doesn't argue with, and I certainly don't argue with him on that. But there is that kind of really interesting where at first nobody is going to suspect that Beverly could be doing anything because she's so normal. I mean, that word normal is thrown around a lot in the film. And of course, I mean, John Waters, man, when somebody is called normal in a John Waters film, that that's it's going to be anything but nobody is suspecting her because she's the normal one. Oh, she's so sweet, she couldn't hurt a fly, which, as Mel pointed out already, of course she can. Even though she's a lover of animals, apparently flies don't count in her world. um but we do see that a little bit of this kind of, like, satanic panic and people being suspicious of things that they don't understand, or that they don't approve of. I mean, I think even to the point, and this is played up for fun, but when Beverly kills her daughter's, well, I guess, ex-boyfriend, the boy who stood her up, who made it very clear that he wasn't the boyfriend, but I guess Misty just, wanted him to be her boyfriend so bad that she had kind of made up a narrative in her head that it was more than it was. But when he is seen out with Tracy Lord's character at the swap meet, and Beverly kills him in the bathroom with the fire poker, and she gets a little bit of blood on her shoes, and her friend is like, "Oh, it looks like you've stepped in a little doo-doo there." Almost to the point of, like, not recognizing something that is, like, clearly blood. She recognizes it later when she testifies against her friend in court. But I did find that really kind of interesting, because you have the people who are quote unquote normal, but they're the ones who are maybe either the most judgmental, or are the ones who are so naive that they can't even see what is in front of them in their face. So it's this really kind of fun suburban satire that we have going on. I'll also There's a really funny line again, when the woman is killed with, I guess it's like a lamb shake that she had just made for lunch. And she's watching Annie, and there's kind of a line of, "Well, that's what you get when you watch so many family films," which I thought was like a really fun. I don't know. I'm just gonna keep saying that I love this film. So I'm sorry. I have a hard time um, being really critical about it just because I love it so much.
No, I understand. You can easily fall into like a little maze of talking about all the funny things in the film, but I agree with you about the tension around the word normal. Um, because, if you think okay, if we think about it as like the premise is that she is like a Leave It to Beaver or Donna Reed type, or as you said, if we're updating it, a trad wife. Um, if we think of it in that regard, that kind of superficial exterior, I guess, um, or that image, we're thinking of that as our image. We wouldn't think that in her mind, killing the math teacher would be protecting the family, I guess, because, right, like even suburbia, I'm doing a lot of air quotes here that y'all can't see, but suburbia would agree with the teacher probably that it doesn't matter if Chip's doing okay in school. He shouldn't be watching this horror stuff. Um, but she's completely supportive of it. Even watches one of the movies with him. And so I think that's interesting too, is that she has the image of it's just like, what you guys think of as a perfect family over here. Um, but in actuality, her reasons for wanting to protect her family and caring about her family are very much related to like stuff that they actually do. He works at the video store and someone didn't rewind the tape. That's, bad manners. So, you know, we have these moments where she kills someone for what I think, if you're thinking of the superficial image she's projecting, it wouldn't quite make sense. And so, yeah, I'm not sure what to do with it any more than that, but I just thought those moments were interesting when it shifts, like why she does what she's going to do. It seems to always be like protecting a rule that she believes in or protecting her family in some ways. It doesn't always completely match up with the superficial image that she's putting forth. And I have to say, just really quickly, I know I'm just saying I found something funny, and I don't know that we can do anything with it in analysis, but her whole running gag about how she kept telling the police officers when they would get close to solving her as the murderer that Scotty doesn't wear a seatbelt. Like every time that got me, even though it happened multiple times. And then at the end, when she sets him on fire and he's just like, but I wore my seatbelt. I just laughed so hard. And maybe I shouldn't have been laughing at that moment, but I was laughing a lot.
It is perfect. It is perfect. And I think that's also one of the things that is really fun and that maybe this explodes the Hagsploitation genre wide open because in in almost all of the movies we've watched up to this point, there has been some attempt at explaining why the woman is the way she is, right? I mean, even in like going back to when we watched Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, there is this idea of these sisters have had this like competition. And there's that line, and I'm gonna get it wrong because we watched it now a few weeks ago, but like there's the line of something like, "Oh, you mean we could have been friends this whole time? Like we could have had a relationship and we could have loved each other and we didn't because we got caught up in this like competition and revenge and what we owe to each other." And it is almost kind of a sad moment in the film where you realize that like everything that has happened and who they turned into didn't have to play out that way. Um, but it did. And so it kind of becomes a tragedy. And it was a little bit of the same way with Straight Jacket, even though we're not really truly given a reason why she's murderous in the first place, other than her husband has had an affair and like ruined her perfect life. And like she just becomes so like overwhelmed with rage that she picks up an axe and hacks them. We still by the end feel for her because of what her like daughter has put her through. And we see her as kind of the redeemed woman, right? But in this one, and of course, I know it's a satire, it's a dark comedy, whatever. But like, John Waters isn't going to give us a reason. I mean, we all, I think, love Beverly and we all are kind of rooting for her. I mean, by the time we've watched her kill so many people when she's hiding in the closet with those sewing scissors, I'm like, yes, get her. I just, we like it. And I mean, even to the point, and we see that by the end with this whole, like, we haven't even talked about the trial and Suzanne Summers coming to play her in like real time. It's just so funny. Um Again, speaks a lot to, like, I don't know, how we view crime and how we view horror and how we take it in. But like, you know, with Beverly, it would be very easy to say, "Oh, she is just really truly believing in who she is, and she has these like rules set for her. And so if somebody goes against the rules, then they need to be punished." And she's like you said, she's protecting her family, because everything she does is in a way trying to protect her family. Um, when she kills the people who, um, when she's in their house towards the end, and part of it is because she sees them eating, and she says they didn't brush their teeth, but also like they are making jokes about her husband, and so it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, she's killing because of that. um but then when you think about the there's several moments that kind of break that apart, right? Because when we first see her before she ever kills, she's making those obscene phone calls to her friend, and we learn it's because her friend cut her off in traffic and stole her parking spot, which I agree, enraging, right? Like, she's not killing her. She's just making these obscene phone calls, but the delight in which she takes in making these obscene phone calls is really a joy to watch. And she constantly teases this woman, um, where she's like, "I'm going to make everybody think she's crazy. I'm going to make her think she's crazy," or after she is found not guilty and she goes after the juror for wearing white after Labor Day. None of these are like protection of the family. Like, yes, they are um kind of righting a wrong, and like, okay, you broke one of my rules, so you have to be punished in some sort of way. But it's also, I think we just see how this like suburban mom maybe isn't truly who she is, and it's just the mask that she wears to hide who she really is, and we're seeing it kind of slip out. So I kind of like that. I kind of like how it's taking this subgenre and doing something else with it. Like, it does kind of break it apart a little bit. um I don't know. I mean, again, I know we're reading a lot into something that was meant to be a satire, but John Waters never gives us something that I don't think is just purely superficial.
I like what you're saying there about this mask idea, because you're right. It is like, it's to protect the family, but also her rules, and her rules could be as weird and personal as they need to be. It's in her mind. And I also like how you point out that there's a progression here. We did kind of jump into the killing, but yeah, there's this. I mean, we can even assume that Doris isn't her first victim of obscene phone calls. We know that she's been reading these books about serial killers and mass murder, etc., for a while, we assume. I mean, she's got the scrapbook, she's got all the letters and the tapes and the pictures, and she has the books that she's been throwing in her recycling, which that becomes a big thing because she's really into recycling, apparently. And the recycling disposal guys become like her. Her helpers and her escape. Um, but there was a progression, and I do think it's interesting to look at it as like she had been using this all as a mask to get along kind of in this suburb, and then it's like just gradually getting worse and worse and worse until at the end it's so obvious that she just went and killed that juror right after she won the court case. Like, the movie ends with people discovering that she had already killed again almost right in front of their faces. And so it's almost like that, like, she was okay at like hiding things. She was okay at hiding these things before. And it's gradually she's becoming, I don't know what the word for it would be, like more and more unhinged as it goes, where she doesn't even really care if she has witnesses. But then, and I don't know how deeply we want to go into this, but we also have the idea that her trial becomes a circus. Like you said, Suzanne Summers comes and she terrifies her with one of her rages. Her son is like negotiating her Geraldo interview. There's a lot of media references in this. We see the Joan Rivers show at one point. Um, so yeah, it's like people are rooting for her, even when they see her murder at the bar. They're chanting her name because there's something about her not seem like there's something about her, almost the impossibility of someone like her being a serial killer, like really grabs like the public's attention and the media's attention in really disturbing ways, but also ways that I think we can kind of see in culture around us. And one last thing before I toss it back to you, but her family's kind of like riding the wave of her fame, but then being scared of her coming home, I thought was really interesting because it reminded me a bit. This is on the Monster She Wrote podcast, but recently we had an episode on Lindy Ryan's Dollface, and there's a character in that book who is is murdering people, or and I guess attacking people would be the better way. And we talked a bit about the idea of like if you're the person that that person is not going to hurt, you are the person who is on their side that they think of as a family member, a friend that they want to protect. What happens when that changes? And I think we see that at the end when it's funny, but when the family's just looking at each other like, what do we do? What do we do? Because they can't leave her or she'll turn on them, right? But if they don't follow her rules, she may. And the guy who is going out with Misty is like, what do I do? And they're like, be really, really good, and it just that is funny, but it is a conundrum, right? Because if she's becoming more and more kind of unable to distinguish between the two masks, what's going to happen when somebody who is on her quote unquote protected list pisses her off, like doesn't recycle a bottle, or says something slightly wrong? It becomes like it's like anger management issues times 1,000 at that point, because if there's a weapon nearby she might use it. So yeah, I thought that was it was a really interesting way of kind of looking at that idea of like her as the killer versus her as the mom.
I completely agree. Um, and I will also say, because we didn't even there were so many good scenes we didn't even get to talk about, like where she chases her non-seatbelt wearing victim into the concert, the like punk concert, and lights him on fire on stage, and everybody sees her and cheers and starts chanting "Serial Mom." She's clearly a fan favorite, and I don't know. I think it's so much fun, but we're nearing the end of our time, so I don't know if we have too much time to get into this. I will say, uh, I'm going to leave us with this. The only cereal I know anything about is Rice Krispies. I think that is maybe one of the great lines of history in the history of film, but who knows? All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say that that's it for today. There is so much more. We could have done a second podcast episode just on this film alone, but we've got other things to talk about. So if you've watched this, if you have thoughts, please share them with us, because I could talk about this film endlessly. We are at No Fear Cast online. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon. We do have some mini episodes, quite a few mini episodes in the backlog to go back and listen to. We also have merchandise available on our website. Of course, you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free, but it does help other listeners find us. Theme music by Nicholas Gasparini. We will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.